Hello, and welcome to the Hunter Museum of American Art's 13th Annual Student Symposium. Each year, we invite students from across the country to respond to a theme that's connected to works in our gallery. And this year, we came up with a theme, Creating Calm in Times of Chaos, inspired by the work of artist Jessica Wohl, whose installation is currently on view at the Hunter. This afternoon, I am joined by Dr. Bart Pushaw and Dr. Amber Hickey, both from the Art History Department at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, as well as our special guest, artist Jessica Wohl. This is the first time we've been fortunate to have the artist who inspired our symposium with us to share remarks and to respond to the student papers. This afternoon, we've selected 3 students to share their work with you. We're going to introduce each of the students and have them present their brief papers, and then we're going to open up the discussion, bringing in Jessica Wohl, the respondents, the students, and our guests to share their responses to the work. The first student who will be speaking today is Ella Swift. Ella is a junior at Sewanee, the University of the South, majoring in art history and minoring in medieval and early modern studies and business. Her primary interests lie in the visual culture of medieval Europe and in the intersection between contemporary art and marketing. She's currently looking forward to a summer internship in Taiwan through the Sewanee Freeman Asia Fellowship as she pursues a career in art business.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can have someone pull my slideshow up really quick, and then I'll get started. Are we good to get that slideshow pulled up? All right, lovely. All right. We can go ahead and flip to the next slide. So my paper is called Parallel Times, Constructing Uniquely New Spanish Calendrical Systems in the 16th Century. The Iberian conquest in Mexico saw widespread violence, including the fall of Tenochtitlan and the subsequent collapse of the Nahua Empire. Warfare, disease, and the rapid imposition of colonial rule created a period of conflict, upheaval, and instability. Despite this chaos, the Nahua and Iberians found common ground in calendrical systems, since both cultures already relied on important religious dates and cycles and scientific numeration to construct their calendrical systems before their meeting in the 16th century. We can go ahead and flip slides there. Linea Torbo de Benevente's diagram of a calendar wheel demonstrates how calendars in New Spain act as a point of many convergences between the Nahua and the Iberians. Today, I will argue that the calendar visualizes how traditions of time were adapted to colonial New Spain rather than imposed upon it. Therefore, the calendar gives us access into how both groups ordered and mediated the chaos that occurred as a result of converging cultures in New Spain. Motolinea's calendar wheel is composed of concentric circles and radial lines that organize time into a harmonious mathematical structure. It cross-references the Nahua calendars with the Julian calendar by charting the cycles of days and months in relation to the 4 main Nahua years. Pictorial icons and numbers signify days, months, or ritual intervals. Motolinia placed a ring of icons in the center of the diagram with numbers arranged in a linear centrifugal fashion. He narrates this effort through handwritten text, translating the Nahua divisions of time through European dates. The calendar wheel would have been used as a teaching tool for viewers unfamiliar with Nahua systems, manipulating line, color, and composition to present a religious and scientific correlation between Nahua and Julian calendars. At the time of the conquest in the 1520s, the main system used in Europe was the Julian calendar, which was based on the cycle of the sun. However, Catholic religious celebrations like Easter relied on the cycle of the moon. The Nahua calendar similarly consisted of 2 systems. The first was a cycle of 260 days called the Tono Puhuali, which was used for divination and religious purposes. The gods were attached to different units of time, often with corresponding festivals. The other count, like the Julian calendar, consisted of a cycle of 365 days used to track the seasons. In both systems, supernatural, religious, and historical events were heavily intertwined within their respective calendrical systems. Therefore, Franciscan missionaries like Montelinia saw the Tonapahuali as compatible with evangelization efforts. Jose Rabasa argues that Montelinia praises the Nawa calendar due to the Tonapahuali's emphasis on astronomical observations associated with religious events that were comparable to European counterparts. In order to demonstrate the triumph of Christianity in New Spain, colonial authorities organized native society into a Christian calendrical system. Although conversion was forced, indigenous monthly feasts continued. Therefore, enmeshing the Christian system with that of the Nawa actively functioned to sustain indigenous culture after European invasion, creating a new identity of indigenous Christians of New Spain, what Lori Dio calls, quote, a distinctively new Spanish form of Catholicism, unquote. Calendars also held practical and scientific applications within early modern societies of Europe and the Americas. As Ricardo Uribe states, quote, regarding the quantitative recording of dates, indigenous peoples and Spaniards showed mutual interest in their calendars, unquote. A significant function of Montellini's diagrams was the popularization of science and the dissemination of scientific and historical information in both Europe and the Americas. The system used within New Spain satisfied the administrative needs of both indigenous and European populations. Now, as scribes were already used to their own precise and regulated numerical system, which is present in all areas of pre-colonial life, and therefore were not surprised by the administrative systems and requests of the Spaniards. The significance of numbers was shared by both cultures. You can go ahead and flip to the next slide on that. Montellini's diagram relies primarily on black ink with highlights in red, green, and brown. Restraint of color mirrors European calendrical and historiographical customs, like the one shown to the right here, allowing the viewer to focus on the scientific and political purpose of the calendar rather than decorative flourishes. The minimal color is reminiscent of European calendrical diagrams, adding validity and familiarity to the diagram for Castilian audiences. Then we can flip to the next one. Montelinia strategically employed color to call attention to the symbols representative of the Tonapahuali. The bright pictorial icons draw on visuals in pre-conquest Nawa codices, like the Codex Borgia, which utilizes similar color palette, including reds, greens, and strong black contour line. Although the Spanish condemned Nawa religious practices, the diagram demonstrates how they acknowledged Nawa knowledge patterns, such as the organization and chronology of their calendars, by corresponding them to Christian chronology. Missionaries reinterpreted Nawa signs as Christian concepts and aligned Nawa festivals with Christian ones. This made Christian rule and conversion more palatable to indigenous audiences by utilizing tools they were already familiar with. The alignment also allowed the Nawa religious calendar to continue, despite the Spanish eradication of many other indigenous objects and epistemologies. The colors are functional rather than expressive, underscoring the diagram's scholarly, spiritual, and political intentions. And we can hit the next slide. The diagram's dominant feature is its systematic, concentric circular lines, which evoke cyclical time. The precise and geometric nature of these lines echo medieval European scientific diagrams, making them familiar to an educated European audience. Utilizing these methods allowed Montelinia to create a scientific image of the Nawa calendar within a European framework that adds validity to his European presentation, but critically also to the Nawa time system, because the circular motif maintains a visual connection to the cyclical Nawa Tonapahuali. The composition of this image continued to develop a scientific approach to rationalizing the Nawa and Julian calendars through its highly centralized and systematic approach. The radio format allows for an organized arrangement that draws the viewer's eye from the inside outward, inviting them to examine and understand Montellinia's scientific alignment of both systems. The outer ring and marginal annotations act as explanatory scaffolding around the central iconography, encouraging engagement from Nawa and European audiences. By blending the cyclical and religious and ritual aspects of the Nawa Tonapahuali and the scholarly clarity of European diagrams, Montellinia's calendar wheel becomes not only a tool for the instruction of European audiences, but a symbolic fusion of colonial worldviews that orders divisive cultural differences into a single, readable visual form. Ultimately, as Susan Spittler argues, calendar circles like Montellinia's, quote, make it clear that the calendar wheel was a colonial innovation and indicate that both Europeans and Nawa contributed to this new means of presenting calendrical information, unquote. The result is what Orozco Echeverri calls, quote, a popular science, as Europeans like Montelinia and his audience take an intellectual interest in the similarities between the Julian calendar and Nawa systems, just as Nawa scribes sought to understand the novel European system. Both the Julian calendar and the Nawa systems combined with the setting of New Spain to create a distinctively New Spanish scientific version of date and time that provided a middle ground for both peoples during the chaotic beginnings of colonial New Spain. We can flip to the final slide there. And Modigliani's calendar wheel ultimately demonstrates how religious convergence and scientific adaptation was performed by both Spanish and Nawa authors through calendric diagrams. Unlike many other parts of New Spanish society, calendar systems were not centralized within colonial dynamics. Instead, prior to the implementation of the Gregorian calendar, they were constructed with influxes of information from various epistemologies present during the time. This allowed the Spanish to promote their right of rule and conversion efforts, and enabled the Nahua to maintain religious autonomy, build a new identity within New Spain, and construct their society as significant in its own right. This fusion made the Christian liturgical cycle appealing to Nahua audiences, and acknowledged the continued importance of their own calendar within New Spanish viceregal society. Indigenous Mesoamericans also adopted the calendrical systems of Europe quickly. Within a few years of Cortez's arrival and conquest, Nahua scribes like the authors of the Codex Mexicanus had already begun to use parts of the Christian calendric system. As such, the Christian calendar became something not only of great interest to them politically, as they asserted their own historical significance, but also of importance to the structure of life as indigenous Christians under Spanish rule. Diagrams like Modigliani's calendar wheel illustrate how calendric systems were combined and explained in a way that allowed both systems to coexist, and created a point of overlap between the Nahua and the Iberians that provided a point of calm and order during an otherwise chaotic transitional period. Traditions of time were adapted to the New World rather than imposed upon it, and a new, distinctively new Spanish calendrical tradition was created. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ella. That was wonderful. And we're going to have a lot of time to talk about that after we do the other two. So now I'm going to introduce B. Davis Fleming, who is a sophomore in art history and classics at Furman University. Davis's research interests are Southern Gothic art and the preservation of memory through visual and material culture. And Davis aspires to a career in museum education.
Hello, hello. Uh, all right. Here we go. Ooh, there we are. So this is this paper presentation is about a contemporary painter named Matthew Baumgartner, and it draws from uh, the journals and sketchbooks that the late artist left behind, and it specifically covers this painting, which you see right now, titled "Flirting on the F Train." And so, uh, I'd like to begin with a passage from uh, one of the artist's gallery talks from the early 90s, just as a way of framing this work within its place. Although, of course, the quote comes from much later. Um, in an urban environment, and New York is a perfect example of this, decay is taking place everywhere. You can go down into the subways and you have the marble, the rust, the ooze of sewage running down the walls. Everywhere you turn, you have cracks in the sidewalk. Everything is showing forth its materiality, and all of the materials are extracted from nature, just transposed to meet human needs. So, in a sense, the city, even though it does not have all the things that we readily associate with nature, trees, grass, flowers, streams, it is still nature, though in a transmuted form. So, as background, um, in 1983, Matthew Baumgartner had just moved to New York City. Having completed his MFA at UNC Chapel Hill, his graduate thesis show complete, he was ready to enter the art world and, quote, make it, unquote. He had spent most of his education, both his BFA at Bob Jones University and his MFA, studying and emulating canonical modernists, the likes of Mayakovitch, Picasso, and Klee, as you see here with a explicit homage to Kazimir Mayakovitch. His work from that time was a form of geometric abstraction, very much drawing from the suprematists like Mayakovitch. Then there was the work that made up the majority of his work from the 80s, a spiritual yet architectural mode of abstracted figuration, drawing from the people and places he encountered in the city. But for a moment in 1984, Baumgartner produced a number of works which most closely resemble abstract expressionist works. They use dark palettes and hefty materials. Roofing asphalt, aluminum paint, and metal screening are all materials that he experimented with during this brief window of time. Flirting on the F Train is one such painting. At this point of transition in his career and artistic progression, Baumgartner found himself in New York City, the center of the art world. The city, too, was undergoing its own transformation at the time. Indeed, we see the landscape of a city in economic turmoil in these works. We have rough textures, cracks, and decay, the surface of the city. We get the sense that Baumgartner is uncertain of his place in it all, or of his place in the annals of art history, or of his place in the competitive gallery scene of New York City. This work, seen here, Ghosts in the City, also a product of this period, suggests that to occupy the space of the city is to haunt it, a purgatory state almost. Yet within Flirting of the F Train is a slice of time of its own, the clashing of darkness and light in the New York subway in misty gray, a work which reflects the chaos of the artist's inner world onto the chaos of this unfamiliar landscape. To approach the experience of the New York landscape, however, we must first follow the historical lead up to the condition of the city as he found it. In the 1970s, New York City faced a fiscal crisis that nearly bankrupted the city as a result of poorly managed municipal debts. Consequently, New York entered a 12-year period of austerity under the fiscal policy of Mayor Edward Ed Koch, which saw drastic cuts in funding for public services, mass layoffs of municipal employees, and the empowering of financial entities in the real estate industry. From the 70s to the mid-80s, public infrastructure in New York City deteriorated. Public parks suffered from frequent vandalism and lack of upkeep. Central Park experienced such heavy erosion that the trees' roots were fully exposed, their bark openly rotting, while the water features grew brown and murky with dirt. Transportation infrastructure, the New York subway and the bus lines experienced a similar degree of deterioration in the early 80s. Both the trains and the subway tracks became hazards and inconveniences. Loose or defective parts, including at least one incident with a 10-pound lag bolt, fell from elevated lines into the wake of unsuspecting pedestrians. Train cancellations and delays were rampant, and persisting subway crime, including shootings, lowered public trust in both the municipal authorities and the transit authority. Meanwhile, the city government's shift towards fiscal conservatism under Mayor Koch rendered the city's attempts at recovery and improvement to be, often, slow and unsatisfactory. A number of municipal worker strikes, including the transit workers, were met with harsh negotiations, worsening the city's relationship with unions. Under Koch, about 7,000 workers employed by the city were laid off, many of whom were replaced with contract workers who enjoyed fewer benefits. Then there were a number of social issues. Homelessness had become a larger issue following the fiscal crisis of the prior decade. The AIDS crisis had placed New York City in a public health crisis and sparked division in the community, and crime was an increasing worry for New Yorkers. It was an unglamorous time to be a New Yorker, and it was certainly a difficult time to be new to New York. The landscape was bleak. So we return then to Flirting on the F Train, equally bleak in its expression of the landscape, with misty, brutal grays emerging throughout the composition as the light tones descending from the top left corner meet the dark tones rising from below. They bring to mind the crumbling concrete of the city's deteriorating public infrastructure, yet at once produce a precarious sense of harmony. Pink tones within a black semicircle shape almost suggest the abstracted subway car with fluorescent lighting within. A square arch at the top left corner suggests the metal arches on the city streets leading down into the subway stations. Short dashes of black paint bring to mind the tracks of the subway, yet as they continue on, they seem to spiral out beyond the bounds of the composition. Indeed, perhaps to spiral around once again at a certain point. The pattern suggests introspection on a broader scale than that which we see in the composition alone. In one 1992 journal entry, Baumgartner stated that he felt, quote, needy and vulnerable in this big city. In a 1985 letter to his friend, Jerry Brown, a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, um, that Baumgartner terms the prospect of leading the city as escape, but laments that the financial constraints of the time and an overly competitive gallery market keep him from doing so. This letter, he notes, was penned on the F train. The mention of vulnerability in the context of the flirting part of Flirting on the F train implies feelings of exposure, while escape implies a coercive relationship with the city, a lack of autonomy within the space he occupies. Perhaps most tellingly on the point of financial limitations, Baumgartner later chose to write the rent he was charged for his studio space at the time on the back of this work's frame. Uh, the economic conditions and physical landscape already described no doubt aided in constructing a atmosphere of entrapment. There was need at all points during the artist's time in New York for respite from a culture of sight, from a space the young artist felt trapped in. But the works he produced in 1984 convey much more strongly a sense of the unknown. Floating on the F train stands out among even them as a passing moment. Baumgartner was persistently interested in geologic time, fossils, layering sediments, those sorts of things. The subway, the transitory space, is unusually fleeting in contrast. In the subway, there is by no means a peaceful atmosphere, itself a victim all the same to the deterioration of the rest of the city suffered. But in between the pressures of the art historical canon and the surrounding city, the fleeting time spent in introspection and contemplation between spaces provided a means by which the young artist could make sense of his place as he navigated the unknowns of his surroundings and his career. Thank you.
All right. So I would like to introduce our last presenter. So we have Olivia Uzuncan. She is a senior at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where she studies journalism and art history. Born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, another California person, she hopes to pursue a career at the intersection of writing, the arts, and philanthropy. After graduating in May 2026, congratulations on that, she plans to relocate to New York and pursue a master's in art business. So welcome, Olivia.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hi, my name is Olivia Uzuncan, and today I'll be presenting my paper, Taking Measure, Process and Stability in the Work of Do Hosa. The Hunter Museum Symposium theme, Creating Calm in Times of Chaos, asks how art can generate form within conditions of uncertainty. Do Hosa's work offers a compelling answer because it locates stability and process. Access across fabric installation and works on paper, Sa returns to the architecture of the homes he has inhabited and subjects those spaces to exacting procedures of measurement, reconstruction, and tracing. Born in Seoul and later living in Providence, New York, and London, he has built a practice shaped by movement between cities and the persistent problem of how home might remain legible when life unfolds across multiple locations. His work addresses that problem through method. This paper argues that Sa uses repeated acts of documentation to preserve the structure of domestic space across displacement. In his practice, process allows the home to remain present even when its original site has receded, and reframes architecture as an active medium of memory capable of carrying continuity through transnational movement. This argument is clearest in Sa's full-scale fabric installation. especially the series Seoul Home, LA Home, New York Home, London Home. These works reconstruct former residences through translucent polyester sewn according to exact architectural dimensions. Walls, thresholds, light switches, and other fixtures appear in full proportion to their original locations, so the viewer enters a house that has retained its structural logic while shedding the material density of an actual building. The installation preserves layout, scale, and sequence. Doorways still regulate passage, corridors still direct movement, the house still organizes the body. Suh's transformation of these elements into colored mesh alters how viewers understand that space. Architecture remains fully legible, yet it appears as a suspended framework rather than a sealed enclosure. This result is an environment in which structure survives through precision rather than through weight. Suh's own account of this project clarifies the stakes of that procedure. In an Art 21 interview, he describes the Korean house project as a way of dealing with cultural displacement and explains that it began with his desire to bring that space wherever I go. That statement positions the work within a problem of portability. The house cannot travel in any literal sense, so Suh reconstructs it through a process that converts architecture into a transportable system. He also emphasizes that the meaning of his work lies in the act of measuring every inch of the space, since that labor allows him to rediscover details embedded in the house and to absorb the space with unusual intensity. Measurement then serves two functions at once. It records the structure of the building and internalizes that structure through prolonged attention. The work carries memory forward because the artist has first rendered the home knowable through exact procedure. The permeability of the fabric walls deepen this argument. Because the walls remain translucent, several rooms can be seen at once, and architectural boundaries become visible without becoming absolute. This decision changes the conceptual force of the installation. A conventional wall fixes one room against another. Suh's wall allows one space to register through the next, so the viewer encounters domestic architecture as an overlapping field rather than as a closed sequence of compartments. That formal condition gives spatial form to displacement itself. Multiple homes can occupy the same visual field. One environment remains perceptible through another. Past residence and present location are held together without collapse. Tate's exhibition materials describe Suh's work as an investigation of the intricate relationship between architecture, space, the body, and the memories and moments that make us who we are. The fabric houses make that relationship visible. Their transparency turns memory into a spatial condition. Their exact proportions prevent that condition from dissolving into abstraction. Suh's process preserves continuity by giving memory a structure the body can still move through. If the fabric installations reconstruct the home as an inhabitable framework, the Rubbing Loving project, Seoul Home, reconstructs it through contact. In this body of work, Suh covers the surfaces of an interior with paper and records them through graphite or colored pencil rubbings. Walls, floors, ceilings, beams, moldings, hinges, and outlet plates all emerge through pressure. The house appears piece by piece as a field of impressions that preserves the texture of the original building with extraordinary specificity. The project shifts the terms of the argument from volume to surface. The fabric houses render the home as a permeable structure. The rubbings render it as an archive of touch. Each sheet registers the encounter between body and architecture, and each mark records a procedure repeated long enough to hold the building in view. This project deserves a stronger claim than summary alone. The rubbings do more than document interior surfaces. They make duration visible. Every section of wall has to be covered, pressed, and traced. Every beam has to be followed across its length. Every threshold has to be translated through repeated contact. That labor converts the house into a record of time as much as of space. Chatterjee's review of Suh's exhibition describes his practice as one of the as one of mapping, tracing, and reconstructing spaces he has occupied, and notes that the rubbings have preserved traces of a live human activity. Those observations point toward a deeper force of the project. In the rubbings, process becomes a means of sustaining presence. The building survives through the artist's repeated return to its surfaces. The work holds architecture in place by committing to it over time. Stability, in this context, emerges through accumulated labor. The house remains present because the artist has traced it into visibility. The rubbing loving project also sharpens the paper's central claim about why Suh's work matters within the symposium prompt. Procedure serves as the means by which Suh converts instability into formal coherence. Suh addresses displacement through acts that impose order on the instability of movement. He measures, sews, aligns, covers, and rubs. These actions carry conceptual force because they convert an uncertain condition into a disciplined form of engagement. The viewer sees that transformation is in the finished work. The fabric installations show a home whose structure has survived relocation through exact reconstruction. The rubbings show a home whose surfaces have survived through sustained attention. Together, they demonstrate that continuity can be produced materially. Stability emerges through a method that preserves what experience would otherwise disperse. Suh's work, therefore, offers more than an exploration of home as a theme. It presents process itself as a strategy for living with displacement. His repeated procedures allow architectural space to remain legible across movement between Seoul, Providence, New York, and London. They preserve home as the structure of memory while acknowledging that life unfolds elsewhere. That is the larger stake of his practice. By treating measurement and tracing as serious artistic methods, Suh shows how form can hold experience across change. His work demonstrates how architecture can function as a durable record of lived space and how process can preserve continuity when location no longer provides on its own.
Thank you, Olivia. That was wonderful. And it's been great to see how these three work together. And that's what we're going to be talking about now. So, for the first person to discuss this, I would like to introduce Jessica Wohl. She is the guest artist for the symposium and also a guest artist at the Hunter right now. Jessica uses found remnants of domestic culture to explore social inequities that range from systemic racism to the demands of motherhood. Born and raised in Minneapolis, she graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute and received her MFA from the University of Georgia. Among other publications, her work has been featured in the New York Times Magazine, New American Paintings, Vogue, Art News, and has been widely exhibited nationally and internationally. She's held residencies at the Vermont Studio Center, the Hambridge Center for the Arts, Stoveworks, and participated in an artist residency in motherhood. She's currently an associate professor of art and chair of the Art History, and Visual Studies Department at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee.
Thank you, Adira, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you so much to all of you for your hard work as you prepared these presentations, and for Bart and Amber for your assistance in helping them come to this moment. It was really a joy to hear you all speak about this topic that I think is really important right now. And I particularly enjoyed the range of time that was covered throughout your presentations. I think what I'll first do is, and I know, Adira, you had said 5 minutes. I don't know, that I might have to go a little over because I feel like there's so much good stuff to respond to. But I think there's some things that I really noticed across all of your presentations, both specifically and across all three, that I think would be worth talking about and bringing to the fore. As we think about the ways that we as humans and artists have strived for creating order and in calm when the world around us is quite the opposite. One thing that really stood out to me across all of the work, particularly with the work that Ella discussed and the work that Olivia discussed, is this notion of bringing together, Ella, you talked about the way that the Noah and Iberians were enmeshing a new form of timekeeping. And I feel like this notion of like the blending of all of, like there's these chaotic things happening, but these distinct groups of people are blending things together. I loved your word enmeshing, new forms of Christianity with indigenous people and European populations into a new system of timekeeping that worked across these cultures. I also was particularly drawn to, I teach drawing and painting. So even though the work in the museum is textile based, I really am at heart like somebody who draws and paints. And the role of drawing as both an artistic act and a verb, like to draw from, is something that I feel is also really paralleled in these works. And so, Ella, I was really moved by how the calendar, this temporal form was evidenced in a literal drawing, and that all of the chaos is in the timekeeping, and the order that we are trying to imagine the world as being measured by is captured and communicated through a drawing, and that is the object that's creating the order, and it has the icons and the symbols and the color, and it, I think that's something that really stood out to me as well, that even though this was an object that had a purpose, it was a functional object, it had an artistic design, and that it was able to enmesh and bring together these different things. I think it's telling, because what's happening across all of these works, and even my own, is this notion that we're pulling from different things. This seems to be like a human drive to pull these disparate parts together and create a kind of uniformity or a kind of harmony that provides maybe a stability or even like a calming effect. It maybe says like, this part of me that maybe has some hostility around it, according to the context of the world, is being able to be like included and finds a place to belong. So that's something that really stood out to me, I think, about your paper. I think, Davis, with what you were talking about, again, I'm kind of like drawn to the drawing that your research is coming from journals and drawings of Baumgartner's time existing and moving through a space that was falling apart in its own infrastructure. I was really, you didn't specifically talk about it, but I was also really interested in the fact that he was pulling from these materials around him in the paintings. You cited that there was enamel and roofing and asphalt and feathers, and the little crumbly parts of the world falling apart around him was a way that he was putting that into his work. And I think using the process of artistic expression to like depict the chaos around him, but in creating this like contained work of art, provides a bit more stability there, right? So I feel like he was almost grasping through the paintings to both depict the chaos, but also like contain it in a way. I think that you talked a bit about a slow recovery, and like I feel like that slowness is something that I guess isn't really important to me in my work, but when we're comparing chaos with its opposite, I think slowness is one of the ways that we sort of center and combat all of the unpredictability. Like if we just take our time and slow down, that is another really important tool to finding the calm. So I really appreciated that about what you said as well. Olivia, with your presentation, I just have to say, I mean, Dohosa is one of my favorites. So it was really great to hear your interpretation of his work, which I'm very familiar with. Obviously, drawing is also an extremely important part of SUS practice, and I even appreciate how in the fabric installations, they do also feel like they look like a drawing, like the seams start to feel like lines and mark making in the space. And then he is also, drawing from his past and drawing from his memories, and this desire to just bring his home wherever he goes. And I think the chaos in his instance is almost his personal displacement. Um, Obviously, there's things happening in the world around him, but that continual uprooting is a form of interruption that I think his work really strives to counter. I was really interested in this notion of bringing home wherever you go, where he goes, that touches on memory, and that's constantly rediscovering every little detail of the home. In terms of my installation, like there's actually a piece of my grandmother's couch upholstery in that installation, and in a way, I felt like the way you were talking about his work like kind of hit home for me in the sense that like I too am pulling these materials from homes that I have fond memories and associations with. Um, Again, the way you were talking about a kind of enmeshing, I found interesting was when you were talking about how several rooms in his installations can be seen at once, which of course can't happen in the actual home. And that also, again, that just reminded me of a way that through the artistic process, we're able to bring multiple things together and unify things in a way that provides, I think, a harmony and a greater depth of like experiencing all of the wonderful things at the same time, as opposed to all of the crazy things at the same time. And the phrase that you were talking about, it may have been, I think, a quote from another scholar, but how you talked about the home as a permeable structure, that really hit home for me. One of the central reasons why I use fabric or use fabric in this installation is because of its permeability, because I see the fabric as this material of the home, of many different homes from many different families across the country who have different beliefs and different religions and different cultures, and they all come together, but the permeability allows the history and the energy from those materials in their former life to kind of come through. And when I made the work, I'm handling it and I'm putting my energy in there, and there's this like exchange that happens that I think makes me feel very connected, even to people that I don't know, which I think is exactly what we need right now at this time where we're all kind of, I don't want to say fighting our own battles, but we all have these strong beliefs and things that we want to engage with. And there's a kind of quieting of the noise and a focus on the material. And we can still have that like energetic exchange that comes between both, that comes between the materials and the people on both sides of that history that kind of engage together. So you talked about the tracings of a life, of a live human activity and like the accumulation of labor. And I think that all of that just like really hits home for me in terms of the installation that's at the museum right now. So that was, I'm sure, more than 5 minutes of response on what you all shared. I'm wondering, just Adira, in terms of time, like how much do you want me to go into the installation versus just keeping the conversation rooted in the students' papers and responses?
Just since they may not have seen the installation, if you could just share a little bit about what it's about, that would be
Okay,
wonderful.
let me see if I can't, I didn't practice this, of course, but let me see if I can't, I pulled my website up, which has some really great images. So let me just see if I can share that, share the screen really quickly, and then I can pull some, can you all see my screen here? I think my computer froze, so I can't hear you, but I'm gonna assume that you can hear me.
We can see it.
You can see it, okay, great. Okay, so this is the largest installation in the exhibition. It's called Of Grief and Getting Past It. And this is a response to a kind of never-ending maelstrom of headlines and oh gosh, I mean, headlines and issues and every kind of chaos in the world that you can imagine. It was my way of sorry, my notes have kind of disappeared here really quick. See if I can find them. It was really just my way of trying to grapple with all of the crazy. And basically what this is an installation of is found fabrics from all over the country. They're all secondhand, whether it's from my family, whether it's from neighbors. A couple years ago, there was an entire move out of the dorms here at the university, and like, I don't know, like an entire room full of clothes and bed sheets and fabrics from the students. So I pulled a lot of that in here, and just wanted to transform it into something that felt very, very heavy at the top, very chaotic, something you could not untangle, that was just kind of almost like storm clouds kind of at the top, but also a enmeshed network that everything was in some way connected to another, and that nothing was like black and white. Everything had a bit of a gradient, like, because I really believe that a lot of these areas just exist in the middle, like in the kind of gray areas. And so that's what this installation was really exploring. Let me see if I can go back to the details so you can see closer up. These are some of the details of the exhibition or the installation up close. So like, I don't know if you can see my cursor, like this little black zipper. This was from some swimming trunks. This is a little washcloth, blouses. Actually, this sort of tropical looking fabric belonged to one of my undergraduate research assistants who helped me on this project. And he actually had left it in his dorm, and I picked it up at the sale. And when we were working together, he was like, "Oh, that's my shirt." So, it's just like little bits and pieces of our lives put together. It's quite chaotic, and it's trying to make sense of all of that through a very laborious, highly cared for, analog process. I can also talk about there's a couple other works in the exhibition. These are embroideries of my weekly to-do lists, and this piece was called "I'll Take Care of It." This is really a way for me to create structure to navigating chaotic times in my personal life. So like, I'm somebody who wears a lot of hats. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, an artist, a professor, a department chair, a friend, a daughter, and all of these overwhelming expectations of these roles just could not be handled for me without some sort of structure. And so my weekly to-do lists that's my structure. I could probably grab one right here. I've got, my weekly to-do list right. Here's the one I've got going right now. So they're kind of always around me. And by sewing these and turning these into artistic objects, I'm really just striving to validate them and validate that work in some way. It's my way of elevating them into something valuable, that through careful handling and like the precious, slow nature of embroidery, I can relive these moments that I rushed through. I can rethink them. They start to function like time capsules, actually. Ella, that's kind of relation to yours. Like, I can look back at these and know what year they were made based on, who appears in them. I can gauge the students who appear in these, like, oh, I remember they graduated in 2020 or something. So they also function like their own calendar in a way. And it's a way to appreciate, I think, how much caregiving I provide to the people in my orbit, both at work and at home. And then the last group of works, I guess there's one more, but we'll just focus on these. These T-shirts are also in the exhibition, and these are a response to a more emotional kind of chaos. In these works, I'm trying to model for others what it feels like to be listened to. So what you're seeing is like a life-sized quilt in the shape of a T-shirt, and it hangs on the wall at about chest height. So when you're in the installation, you're standing in front of these, almost like they're about to give you a hug, or like the person who might be wearing the T-shirt is saying this back to you. So it's just, since so much of our personal and societal interactions are discordant or tense, we might often feel like we're defending ourselves against those whose ideas are different from our own. I'm really looking here to create a situation where one can be reminded of what it feels like to be heard and validated, like without the constant back and forth. It's just a kind of quieting of those conversations. I don't know if I have let me see if I can pull up a detail here. These are all hand stitched. So you can, they're all hand quilted and hand embroidered. So it's a very slow, cared for, meticulous process that really slows me down when the rest of the world is kind of going crazy, to just work on these slow hand stitches. It just quiets the rest of the world. You can just focus on one thing that you can touch, that's tangible, it's soft. So that's really, I think a lot of what is at the heart of the exhibition. So I think with that, I may just stop there. I stopped my sharing. Let's see. I feel like my computer's a little frozen. There we go. Okay, does that work?
That's perfect. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah,
And
great.
thanks for sharing your work and for all of the thoughts you had on the students' papers. And I think that's a really great way to open up the discussion about their work. And so I was going to invite Dr. Hickey and Dr. Pushaw to say a few things. And also for our three students, feel free to respond at any time to comments made about your own work, to share comments about your other students' works. Just, this is a time for open sharing. And I'll say for our guests, if you just want to do the little emoji thing with the hand to put it up, then we can have you join in as well.
I can get us started. Yeah, I was really impressed with all of, I think the talks individually were just really good, strong, effective talks. But I think also the ways that, um, like, what does it mean to kind of like assert kind of continuity, or what does it mean to like be able to think about the future when everything around you is kind of seemingly telling you, trying to foster that kind of cynicism. I think whether that's in this kind of apocalyptic environment of the conquest in Mexico, whether, this like dilapidated state of New York in the 80s, or those are just Jim more broadly thinking about migration in the 20th century and its like broader, affective impacts. I think what all of the artists and makers that all of y'all are engaged with, I think are all really um, interested in this kind of, or at least the way I understood it, right, from your presentations is yeah, like this kind of forward future making kind of perspective that is like in many ways deeply rooted with the past. I especially appreciated Davis when you were talking about your artist's interest in sediments and paleontology, and then suddenly it completely changed what I saw in that painting, and then realizing what does it mean that they're picturing the subway and it's underground, and I was like, oh, it totally transformed what I saw there. But anyway, but I think yeah, there was just this really I think really interesting and compelling like through line in these radically different contexts about um focus and this future making. So I just wanted to, I don't know, have that. I don't know if that's generative for anyone, but that was just something that really came to mind for me.
I can add to that as well because I had some connected thoughts. Um, and I mean, I've been really kind of obsessed with this quote about decay, Davis, that you shared at the beginning of your paper. And so I've been thinking about, okay, Bart, you're mentioning, continuance, right? And the insistence on futurity and specific manifestations of futurity. And I'm also thinking about the role of decay versus liveliness across these three projects. Liveliness of memory, liveliness of cultural practice, um, liveliness of a city, right? And I completely agree. All of these pieces are just so strong, and the connections between them are really, really generative. So I was thinking, in relation to your paper, Davis, um, what are the benefits of decay? Like, what does decay offer us as a gift, right? Versus this kind of idea that decay is unsightly and, we don't necessarily want to look at it, but actually it's necessary for continuance. Um, and then, thinking about Ella's paper, what does it mean to push against the repression of a cultural practice or a set of cultural practices, and and say no, we insist on survivance, even if we have to pivot and kind of inhabit um, a different structure, right, and kind of reshape that calendrical structure. Um, yeah, and also I similarly was obsessed with this kind of mention of geological time, which also records decay. And Olivia, there's something interesting in your paper, which is that in relation to decay, which is that there's no decay, right, in the sculptural works and in the drawings or in the installations, because it's kind of these installations are frozen in time, right? And so what does it mean to have kind of an undecayed visual record of memory of space, right? And I mean, yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on, but that's just in relation to what Bart was saying. I just wanted to offer that as well.
Thank you. And yeah, and I've been thinking about the two words decay and displacement and how they are so connected in all three of yours, because our morning decay is really due to displacement, and how in each of your instances, going back to what Jessica said, kind of calmly and quietly, each person or group of people was finding ways to make sense of that displacement, or that feeling of decay due to that displacement. So I thought there was just another line there as well. And I was wondering if the students would like to say anything about our responses or about each other's, because I know you all heard each other's for the first time today as well.
I did have a thought about uh, Olivia's work in relation to Jessica's work with her installation. I was very struck by the way that um, we search for comfort in times of chaos, um, and like like when we were responding to the decay around us, um do we try to emulate like a sort of um parallel to comfort, but that's like not exactly um with the like you know, versions of domesticity with the installations Olivia was talking about and the you know, these you know, the comfort of these quilts, or you know, do we retreat in, or do we try to embrace the decay around us and try to like you know, uh use respond to our environment just by depicting it, you know? Um, that was a connection that was very interesting to me.
I think something that was interesting to me was this idea of memory. I think it was really central to my research when I was doing it, but then I also noticed it a lot in Olivia's presentation today. Just this idea that home is tied to memory. And I mean, it shows up in mine as the Nawa are trying to preserve this cultural memory that they have from before the Spaniards came. But then Olivia's, it's like on a more personal level for Dohosa, as he's like trying to preserve his own homes that he's had. Um, so just the idea that memory is tied to calm in some ways, and that I think we can even find that in our personal lives, that like going back to good memories or to a place that feels like home, like is calming for a lot of people. I know it is for me, yeah.
I definitely agree with Ella. I also was reflecting while writing this paper and watching both of you guys' presentations, specifically Ella's and Jessica's exhibit. But home functions as a noun, a verb, and an adverb and an adjective. And I think that's really interesting because we all have such different interpretations of what home is. And I mean, there's that quote, it's like home is where the heart is, but there really are so many different interpretations and ways that our mind where our mind goes when we think of home. And I think that like it's so correlated with memory. And I know that I think we're all in college. And so as we enter this next chapter, like home will definitely change. And we went from our childhood homes to college to this next chapter. And I think how we choose to cope with that and cope with the transition is really crucial in this next chapter. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I might just add to that. I also think that what's interesting, and obviously we're talking about art making here, in one form or another, but I think it's really important to add to what you're saying, like the significance and the importance of materiality, and that I feel like in a more and more digital landscape, that we're like seems like we're on this trajectory toward. I feel like the draw to something tangible is really important. Whether it's, I'm going to take my house and carry it with me, or I'm going to like touch and love every little moment of this structure. Um, and, even um, with with Baumgartner's work, like just the gathering of the physical materials of this space, it just seems to me that like when you're thinking about moving forward in the next chapters, like we have the like the memory in our minds, we have a kind of temporal memory, but I feel like artists especially are just grappling for ways to hold on to the physical objects that retain these histories. Maybe if you're a writer, it's more documented in the written word, but I do think when you're up against a kind of digital landscape where your photographs of home are just in here, um, the longing for something that we can touch and hold and feel and have a different sensation with is really strong, I think, and actually is quite calming, in these chaotic times. So.
And do any of our guests want to say anything at all? No? Okay. Well, and then offering, to the entire panel and of course to the students, if you guys have any more to say, because I think so many great ideas were already brought up and it's a lot to almost process and percolate on.
I have a question maybe for each student. I'm curious what brought you to these topics personally. Like what are your personal interests and how did you come to these subjects for your presentations?
My paper kind of started as a class here at Sewanee. Dr. Todd here taught a class on visualizing the other, and we talked a lot about like colonial New Spain and how that kind of culture came to be and how that was shaped. And when I was kind of doing research for my term paper and trying to figure out what I wanted to write it on, I was really intrigued by some of these calendrical diagrams and just this idea that they're all kind of combining. It so much during that time period looked so very divisive to me, and that seemed like one point that like maybe wasn't. And that was just really intriguing to me as I was looking into stuff. And I was also like connecting it back to some reading that I'd done in high school as to like on clocks and calendars. And like, this sounded really interesting. So kind of just dove in um, and found it really interesting as I got to work.
For me, I studied abroad with Sotheby's over the summer, and one of our field trips was going to the Tate Modern and seeing Suz exhibitions. And I we had to choose one of either a gallery or exhibit to write an op-ed or an exhibition review, and I ended up doing his exhibit at the Tate. And I think what really struck out to me was how he really like sheds light on these small things that we don't think about on a daily basis. And I mean, there's so much intimacy and the doorknob that you use every single day and the coffee maker and the outlet, and you never think about these objects, and yet they're so crucial and the crux of your home. And so because I had already written about it, and then when I got the opportunity to apply for the symposium, it just felt like there was so much alignment within what I already loved so much, and also um, his or in the prompt. And I've also been doing a lot of research on the importance of analog activities, which I think in a world where we're so focused on our phones and technology, I mean, I have an abhorrent screen time. And I think that a lot of people have really turned to things that use your hands. So, like needlepointing or art or mahjong or whatever it may be. There's something about the brain when you start a task and you complete it that it really sends signals that are different than when you just doom scroll and decide to close off your phone and go to bed. And I felt like this exhibit really epitomized that of that calming measurement and process.
Um, I was drawn to my research topic as originally as part of a curatorial research for an exhibition titled New Magic in a Dusty World, which is also on Matthew Baumgartner. Um, but uh, and part of that research was about examining the social conditions of New York um, during the 1980s that the exhibition that's the body of work the exhibition focused on. But while I was doing that, and I saw the exhibition this exhibition theme of creating calm in a time of chaos, I was I was instantly reminded of all of the mentions that I saw looking through the archive of Baumgartner's journals and sketchbooks of the tension between his love for New York City and its energy, but also his feelings of uncertainty and his dissatisfaction with the art market and the commercial and like the centralization of like um, celebrity and like trends in the 1980s like blue chip gallery scene. And so I really wanted to dig into the um, like how do um, and I think this is something that um, has also kind of pops up in the other research papers as well. How do we resolve that tension between like having an affinity for the spaces that we occupy, but also feeling dissatisfied and overwhelmed by them? And like, how do we get to a place where we're comfortable with where we are and who we are?
Thank you all. Does anyone have anything else to say, or we can close out? All right. Well, thank you to Davis, to Ella, to Olivia, to Dr. Hickey, to Dr. Pushaw, and of course to Jessica for sharing her work with us and for inspiring this entire symposium. It was really an honor to work with all of you, and I know you're all finishing up your semesters and off to do some great things. And so wishing all the best with that. And just to let you know that this will be up on YouTube, and I'll be sure to post that for you as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you guys have a beautiful weekend and good luck on your finals.
Thanks so much, Adira.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you all. It was great.
Thank you.